It was a cold October evening, the kind where the wind seemed to whisper through the bare branches, making the leaves shiver as they fell. My name is Mark, and I had just moved into a small town that seemed frozen in time, with old houses lined up along cracked streets. The town had a charm to it, but it also had a strange, quiet atmosphere that I couldn't shake off. I was unpacking boxes in my new home, an old house at the edge of the woods. It wasn't my first choice, but the rent was cheap, and the realtor didn't mention anything unusual about it. As I arranged my things, I couldn't help but notice how the sun quickly dipped below the horizon. It got dark early in October, and I wasn't used to it. That night, after settling in, I sat down on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot coffee. The silence was eerie. No cars, no voices, just the wind. I glanced at the woods and noticed a strange shape moving between the trees. It was too big to be a deer and too quick for a person. My heart skipped a beat, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just an animal, I thought. The next few days went by without much happening, but every night, I saw that same shadowy figure in the woods. It seemed to be watching me. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but it felt too real. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to go into the woods. Maybe if I saw it up close, I could put my mind at ease. The air was cold and damp as I stepped into the trees. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but everything looked the same, just trees and leaves crunching under my boots. I walked deeper into the woods, the silence around me growing heavier, until suddenly I heard a soft whisper. Mark. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and I spun around, shining the light in every direction. There was nothing, but the whisper had been so clear, like someone was standing right next to me. I turned to head back, but before I could take a step, I heard it again. Mark, come closer. This ran. I didn't care what it was or where the voice was coming from. I just wanted to get back to my house. The trees seemed to close in on me as I stumbled through the underbrush, barely able to see the path. Finally, I burst out of the woods and onto my front lawn, breathing heavily. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart still racing. Whatever was in the woods wasn't just in my head. I knew that now. I peeked through the window, but all I could see was darkness. I didn't sleep that night. The following day, I went into town and asked the locals about the woods. Most of them shrugged it off, saying the woods had always been strange, but nobody could give me a clear answer. One old man, however, pulled me aside after hearing my question. "You don't go into those woods after dark," he warned, his voice low and serious. "Something lives out there. It's been there for years, and it watches anyone who moves too close." I wanted to believe he was just an old man telling tall tales, but deep down, I knew there was something to his words. That night, as I sat in my house, I heard something at the window. It was a soft scratching, like fingernails on glass. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. There, just outside, I saw a face, a pale, gaunt face staring at me with hollow eyes. I jumped up, grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and rushed to the door. But when I opened it, no one was there. The air outside was still, and the woods were silent. After that night, the shadow didn't just stay in the woods. It came closer to the house each evening. I could feel its presence watching me, even inside. The whispers grew louder, always calling my name. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the presence wouldn't leave me alone. October was almost over, and the days were growing shorter. I didn't dare go outside after sunset anymore. But one night, the knocking started. It was slow at first, just a soft tap at the door. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but the knocking got louder. "Mark, open the door." I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping that would keep whatever it was outside. But the knocking didn't stop. "Mark." The voice was inside the house now. I turned around, and there, in the dark corner of the room, stood the shadow. It was no longer just a figure in the woods. It had followed me home. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and before I could scream, the lights flickered and went out. I don't know what happened after that. All I remember is waking up the next morning, the house quiet and empty. But the shadow is still here. I can feel it watching me, waiting for October to end. Because after October, it will never leave. My name is Jacob, and I grew up in a small town that always felt different in October. The air had a chill to it, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was something else, something I couldn't quite explain. Every year, strange things happened around Halloween, but no one ever talked about it. The town's old folks called it the visitors, though most people brushed it off as some old ghost story. I never believed in it. At least I didn't until last October. It started like any other fall evening. The leaves were a mix of red and orange, the sun setting early behind a thick wall of clouds. My friends and I had planned to hang out at the old park near the edge of town. It was a tradition we had, spend Halloween night swapping ghost stories and daring each other to go into the woods nearby. That year, though, something felt different. I remember looking at the sky as we gathered at the park, noticing how the clouds seemed darker, heavier than usual. There was this strange, unnatural stillness in the air, but I shook it off. It was just Halloween vibes, I thought. By the time the sun had completely set, the park was lit only by the dull glow of a few street lamps. We sat in a circle, laughing and joking, trying to scare each other with made-up stories, but the usual excitement wasn't there. My friends seemed uneasy too, glancing around more often than usual. That's when I noticed the lights. It started small, just a soft blue glow at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was someone's flashlight. Maybe kids messing around. But as I stared at it, I realized it wasn't moving like a flashlight would. It was hovering, flickering slightly, like it was watching us. "Do you see that?" I asked the others, pointing toward the woods. They all turned to look, and for a moment nobody said anything. The blue light was still there, floating just beyond the tree line. Then another light appeared beside it, this one a deep red, and another, and another. Soon the woods were dotted with these strange glowing orbs, all hovering silently in the dark. "What the hell is that?" Tyler, my friend, whispered. We all stood up, backing away slowly. The lights didn't move, but there was something about them that made my skin crawl. It felt like they were watching us, waiting for us to make a move. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice shaking. We didn't argue. As we turned to leave, the lights started moving. Slowly at first, then faster, drifting toward us. The closer they got, the more I realized they weren't just lights. There was something behind them. Shadows, dark, tall figures that seemed to blend into the night. We ran. I don't know how fast we were moving, but it felt like the faster we ran, the closer the lights got. The park seemed endless, the trees looming above us, casting long shadows that only made it harder to see. My heart was pounding, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, ragged and panicked. We made it to the street, but the lights didn't stop. They followed us, floating silently, like they were gliding over the ground. The figures behind them, tall, slender, and almost human, but not quite, seemed to stretch as they got closer, their shapes warping and bending in unnatural ways. We reached Tyler's house first, slamming the door behind us and locking it. For a moment, there was silence. The lights stopped outside, hovering just beyond the front yard. We watched through the window, trying to catch our breath. What are they?" Sarah whispered. None of us had an answer. We just stood there, watching as the lights flickered and the figures behind them swayed. Then, without warning, the front door rattled. We all jumped, staring at the door, but no one moved. The rattling got louder, like something was trying to get in. Tyler grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, but the door kept shaking, the hinges creaking like they were about to give way. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We stayed silent, staring at the door. For a long time, nothing happened. The lights outside began to fade one by one until there was only darkness. The park, the woods, the street, all were eerily quiet. "We need to check the windows," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We moved slowly through the house, checking every window, every door. But the lights were gone. Whatever those figures were, they had vanished into the night. For the rest of the night, none of us slept. We stayed in the living room, huddled together, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The town was quiet, and by morning, it almost felt like the whole thing had been a bad dream. But it wasn't. The next day, the town was buzzing with news of strange sightings the night before. Some people had seen the lights. Others claimed they heard strange noises outside their homes, but nobody had answers, and no one talked about it for long. Just like every year, the town quickly moved on, pretending nothing had happened. But I knew better. October wasn't over, and the visitors weren't done. That was just the beginning. Every night since then, I've seen them. The lights, the figures, they come back. Not as close as before, but they're always there, just beyond the tree line, watching. And I know they're waiting. For what? I don't know. But when the next October comes, I'll be ready. Or at least, I hope I will be. October had always been my favorite month. The crisp air, the smell of bonfires, and the bright orange pumpkins that lined every porch in town made everything feel alive. But this October, something felt different. It wasn't just the weather, it was the sense that something was lurking, waiting for the right moment to show itself. My name is Chris, and I grew up in a small farming town. Every year, we celebrated the Harvest Festival on the night of the full moon, which everyone called the Harvest Moon. This year, it was set for October 31st, right on Halloween. The entire town was excited. People dressed up, brought out their best pumpkins for carving, and prepared for the big event. I always looked forward to it, but this year, something about the festival felt off. As the days passed, the sky grew darker earlier than usual, and the moon seemed to hang in the sky longer, glowing with an eerie brightness. On the night of the festival, I decided to take a walk through the fields before heading into town. The fields were vast, stretching out beyond the horizon, filled with rows of tall corn that swayed gently in the breeze. The moon was already rising, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. I had walked these fields 1,000 times, but tonight felt different. The rustling of the corn seemed louder, almost like whispers following me. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see someone or something there. But I was alone. At least, I thought I was. As I made my way deeper into the field, I noticed something strange. A scarecrow stood in the middle of one of the rows, but I had never seen it there before. It wasn't unusual for farmers to put up scarecrows, but this one was different. Its clothes were old and tattered, its hat barely hanging on, and its face, well, its face was just wrong. Instead of the usual burlap sack, it had a carved pumpkin for a head. The pumpkin's smile was wide, too wide, with jagged teeth that looked almost real. I shuddered and decided to turn back, but as I started to walk away, I heard a soft crunch behind me. I froze. The wind had stopped, and the air was still. Slowly, I turned around. The scarecrow hadn't moved. It was just standing there, the grin on its pumpkin face staring at me. I laughed to myself, shaking off the feeling of unease. "It's just a scarecrow," I muttered, trying to calm my nerves. But as I walked back toward the edge of the field, I heard the crunch again. This time, it was closer. My heart began to race, and I quickened my pace. That's when I saw it. Another scarecrow. It was standing at the edge of the field where there hadn't been one before. This one looked just like the first, with its pumpkin head grinning in the moonlight. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew something was wrong. Scarecrows don't move on their own. Without thinking, I ran. The dry stalks of corn whipped against my legs as I sprinted through the field, my breath coming in short gasps. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, and I nearly tripped several times. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to get out of there. When I finally broke free from the cornfield, I collapsed onto the dirt road that led back into town. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I was drenched in sweat, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what might be standing behind me. The festival was in full swing when I arrived, and the bright lights and cheerful sounds of laughter felt like they were from another world. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that what I saw was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe someone had set up more scarecrows for the festival. Maybe it was just a prank. But as I walked through the festival, something felt off. The decorations looked the same as every year, pumpkins, hay bales, and scarecrows. But there was something strange about the scarecrows this time. They all had the same grinning pumpkin heads, just like the ones I had seen in the field. Their eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went. As the night wore on, the harvest moon climbed higher into the sky, glowing a deep orange. The town square was packed with people, and the mayor was preparing to give his annual speech to kick off the festivities. I tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't. The scarecrows were everywhere, and they were all watching. Then, the power went out. The entire festival plunged into darkness, and the only light came from the glowing harvest moon. People gasped and stumbled around, trying to find their way in the dark. I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the scarecrow closest to me. It was standing just a few feet away, its jagged grin illuminated by the moonlight. And then it moved. Its head tilted slowly to the side, as if it were studying me. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The scarecrow's arms began to twitch, and its pumpkin head turned, fixing its hollow eyes on mine. The whispers from the field came rushing back, louder now, filling my ears with unintelligible words. The scarecrows around the square began to move, their pumpkin heads glowing faintly in the moonlight. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere to go. The scarecrows closed in, their grins growing wider, their arms reaching out. I turned and ran, but no matter where I went, the scarecrows were there, waiting, watching. The town was no longer safe. The harvest moon had brought something with it, something ancient and hungry. And as the moon reached its peak, the whispers became clear. Time to harvest. That was the last thing I heard before everything went black.